Hello. My name is Dennison Bertram. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about the Hyperscale infrastructure thesis for DAOs. This was kind of a work on trying to get the best buzzwords into a title, and I think I've made that work. So I'm going to start with this image, and then I'm going to explain why I'm showing this a little bit later. But this is back in 2016, if many of you don't remember. But Facebook kicked Zynga to the curb. Publishers are next. And if you remember, in 2016, Zynga was kind of the hottest thing out there. They were worth like $1 billion, and all because of Farmville on top of Facebook. So to get started with my talk, I'm going to start with part one, the road behind us, and tell you a little bit about Tally. I am the co-founder and CEO of Tally, and our focus has been on building DAO tooling. Looking back, this is the original Tally thesis. Not sure how well you can read this, but we really focused on the idea that existing DAO services weren't ideal. Governance is the underpinning of a successful, thriving, decentralized ecosystem, and that we believe in lightweight, composable, secure governance systems. While not all of our original thesis 3 years ago remains true, the core of it, the most important pieces, are more important today than ever. Tally today is used by the top teams of the ecosystem. But let's fast forward to 2023, where we are now. Tally, in this period of time, using the governor framework as the primitive for this interoperable, composable governance framework, helped scale the ecosystem from 10 million in treasury value assets to 10 billion. So we saw here that, okay, our original thesis had legs. There was something here that was really important, that we really did need the version of ERC20, but for governance. But that was really only the beginning. Today, there are hundreds of DAOs on Tally. There are hundreds of thousands of users and many, many hundreds of thousands of participants in DAOs. Everyone who's been a part of the 2020 DAO class was right. DAOs are the future. So, part two. That makes sense. I think a lot of folks here are probably bought in on DAOs. If you came to see this talk, you probably think, yeah, DAOs do work. But something has happened since then, and that is scaling. Scaling really changes everything, because now we are moving away from just the Ethereum layer 1. Ethereum, when we think about it, natively is a decentralized system by design. But when we start building on top of it, we have to think about what decentralization looks like more closely. We need to be more careful and choosy about it. Because scaling has really unlocked an entirely new set of questions. Now, some of these questions might not be obvious, some of them are obvious, but I'll get into them a little bit. While Ethereum, L1, and Bitcoin are decentralized by design, let's think about more about the L2s and the L3s. And the L4s. What does the decentralization look like for our messaging layers, our sequencers, our data availability committees, our bridges, staking services? You can go on to provers, block builders, all the infrastructure necessary to run L2s at scale now also need to be decentralized. All of these pieces are critical to have operate in order to have L2s that are secure. So one thing you might wonder is, well, okay, but tell me a little bit more. Generally, when we talk about things like Ethereum, when we talk about how do we enforce decentralization, we give L1 people the ability to fork the chain, right? If you have Ethereum and you don't like what's happening, you can fork it, and that has been done many times. But L2s present a different problem here. L2 state, L2 liquidity, contract entry points. These things are not forkable. You cannot fork an L2 because you don't take the liquidity with you, right? When you bridge tokens over to your L2, if you fork it, those bridge tokens still remain in the original instance, right? That presents a really complex challenge because the original decentralization guarantees that you get with Ethereum, you no longer get here. This is not your option of decentralization of last resort. All of these things are unforkable. So what does political decision making mean in these environments? And what does it mean for you? And when I say for you, I mean also the user, but also the platforms, also the people building on top of it, also the relationship of L2s with other L2s. So I'm going to get into the meat, which is hyperscale infrastructure. So what is hyperscale infrastructure, right? Like, I like to start with the buzzword. Sometimes people cringe when I say hyperscale infrastructure, but I think I can win you over to what I'm trying to express here. Hyperscale infrastructure is infrastructure with no value capture ceiling. There's no limit to the amount of value that can accrue in these layers. L2s anchor into L1, but L3s anchor into L2, L4s anchor into L3s. We have messaging bridges, shared sequencers, provers, executors, staking services, all of these things. Any one L2 in our ecosystem can theoretically service trillions of dollars of value. There's no upper limit to what these networks can service in terms of value. Or is there? Think about this for a moment. Why can't Arbitrum or Optimism or Linea or any number of the other projects host trillions of dollars when you think about how you can build new systems on top of those systems if you trust them? The most important part here, and the point that I really want to drive home in this presentation, is they must all have a credibly neutral decision-making layer, a decentralization stack. They must have this, right? Why? Because everything sufficiently large must be decentralized. Okay, but why? Because you cannot risk building on a layer that is not credibly neutral. You cannot risk being Zynga on top of Facebook. And the most obvious thing here is people tend to think about is, oh, you're talking about censorship, Dennison, right? Oh, they're going to censor my transactions. And that's the obvious answer. But the subtle answer is a bit more nuanced, right? So here I have the main reason is if you grow valuable enough, you'll get rugged by the layer itself. And we start to see this happening in places. Facebook is the great example, right? Zynga grew to be $1 billion with Farmville, and Facebook grew jealous of it and kicked them off and built their own game platform, right? And what did that do? That killed Facebook's ability to encourage people to build on top of that layer. No one has ever bothered realistically to think, I can build an independent business on top of Facebook again. And you could argue the same about Twitter, even recently with the API. You could argue the same with Reddit, even recently with the API. These layers are so large that they are actually dangerous to you because they are not credibly neutral. I have to put this up because this is a recent example of this in crypto land, right? The multi-chain service was a decentralized stack, but was it credibly neutral? Was it credibly decentralized? Can you believe that they were decentralized, right? Of course, it was a decentralized service. It just happened to all live at the CEO's house on his laptop. And now so does the $120 million that the system had locked up. Oof, right? So I like to say, if your stack is on Facebook, you're the next Zynga. And this is important to think about, because getting back to my earlier point, okay, what you're afraid of is being censored. But if you think about building a business, if you think about building a $1 billion ecosystem, that's not really what you should really be worried about. You should be worried about the subtle business decisions that L2s, messaging relays, bridges, all these subtle decisions that they need to make in their product as time goes on, and wonder, does that change impact my business? Because it's possible that an L2 implements a new precompile that benefits your competitor and hinders you. If anyone remembers, not all that long ago, Hayden and Uniswap were in favor of a new EIP, and the community on Ethereum kind of lost their heads about it. Now imagine it on an L2, right? Where you have a network that you're building a business on, but you're not quite sure if the network, the underlying layer itself, is aligned with your business direction, with your community's direction. So this is why I sort of just explained that the problem is more subtle. But can you trust decision-making to be made in a credibly neutral way? And this extends also to the social layer, because DAOs and these layers have a lot of money. And how the money is spent is also a determinant in the success and the effectiveness of the underlying layer and the people who are building on top of it. So I'm going to let that sink in for a little minute here. There are so many infrastructure decisions that can benefit one party over another. It is so early in the decentralization space and the scaling space that when you think about where are you going to build, you have to choose a decentralized and credibly neutral layer. It is too dangerous to build upon non-credibly neutral layers. Even if it's decentralized, that doesn't mean it's credibly neutral. Here at Tally, we are building the tools necessary to launch, operate, and govern hyperscale infrastructure. Infrastructure that has no value capture ceiling. Because if your layer is not credibly neutral, there's a very low limit to the amount of value that can accrue in this layer. There's a very low limit to how much value projects are willing to store on your layer. You cannot risk becoming so large that the underlying layer rugs you itself. This is what we are calling the decentralization stack. What we see is the evolution of just the concept of DAOs, but really applied to these enormous ecosystems. Because L2s are not just a DAO that votes on doing X or votes on doing Y. They maintain the political balance of an enormous ecosystem of really important participants. These are data availability layer providers. These are the messaging bridges. These are the sequencers. These are the provers. These are the process for approving new sequencers, for decentralizing the sequencers. These are the contracts that actually link the L2s back to L1 in the first place. Right? This is not just a small committee that votes on X or Y. This is an entire huge organization that is working to power the future of digital infrastructure. So what we are working on here is enabling credibly neutral infrastructure because it's early. We've started at voting with DAOs. We started 3 years ago helping DeFi protocols. And now we see that the future actually is much larger. The opportunity for everyone is much larger. At small scales, at medium scales, at large scales, and my favorite buzzword of all, of course, is at hyperscale, right? Because 5 or 10 years from now, how large will these L2s be? If we are settling the world's global transaction throughput, how valuable will these infrastructure pieces be? And who are going to be the players? Today, you get airdrop tokens and you participate in a DAO. But tomorrow, this is going to be Microsoft and Google and MasterCard who are working to gain political influence on our payment settlement rails, on the infrastructure that will power their businesses, right? So they tried the centralized service of sidechains in the past, right? We all remember enterprise blockchains, right? But now that we have L2s, we will see them participate. So the credible neutrality will be even more important as the players become even more powerful. So I think I'm almost out of time. If you want to unblock your project's potential, please come and speak with me. Please speak with Tally. You can get in touch here at hello@tally.xyz. And I think I've perfectly finished this. I have 50 seconds left. But if you have any questions, please catch me outside. Happy to talk more about it with you. And I hope I've sold you on the buzzwords as being actually very necessary.